I'm Roberto Baldwin, and this is Tomorrow Today's Sustainable Mobility Brief. The transportation world is evolving at a rate not seen in decades. The transition from fossil fuels to sustainable energy has brought with it some truly exciting opportunities, but also some confusion. I'll sift through the noise and share quick updates on the latest news, trends, and advancements that will impact our world for years to come. This week on the Tomorrow Today Briefs podcast, we have Chris Martin, Honda's Technological Director of Communications. Chris, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Roberto.
I think there is a sort of narrative when it comes to electrification, whereas if you weren't doing it like 5 years ago, which Honda was doing it, you're behind. And the reality is that electrification it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Things take time. But one of the things that's very exciting, and I think for some people might be a little bit surprising, is that Honda has been very bullish on solid state lately. So solid state batteries. Now, can you give us a quick introduction into the technology and what that means for future Honda EVs?
Sure. So pretty much all the hybrids, all of the EVs that are out there on the road today use lithium-ion batteries that use a liquid electrolyte. And it's pretty much everything. It's, you're in your iPhone, in your any consumer device out there right now, with a few small exceptions, are using liquid lithium-ion batteries. And they have great energy properties. That's why they've kind of risen to the top as far as being able to be very portable and producible in mass scale. And the costs have come down dramatically on liquid lithium-ion batteries over the last few years, which is partially what is enabling the EVs to get on the road faster. But they do have some drawbacks. They use a liquid electrolyte that is somewhat toxic and also has some rather unpleasant things that happen if it leaks out in certain circumstances. It can catch on fire. I think you might have seen some high-profile instances where batteries were damaged and the fire department has to flood them with water for quite a while to bring the battery down. So what you end up having to do with a liquid lithium-ion battery is you have to really protect it in a vehicle. You have to put a lot of structure around it to make sure that it's protected against cracking or leaking or whatever from damage. That adds a lot of weight to the vehicle. So what was discovered, I think, going back a couple of decades perhaps, was the solid state electrolyte. And essentially, instead of using a liquid electrolyte, you use a solid. And then there's been a lot of research from a number of different companies on what would that solid material be and how do you make it? And can you make it as efficient at conducting electricity through it as a liquid electrolyte? Because you got to figure liquid, you fill a cup with water, it fills the whole thing. There's no gaps. There's no air gaps or anything else like that between the liquid molecules. It's very efficient at transmitting electricity across it. When you get a solid, and once you make it solid, sometimes there are little gaps. So the electricity can't flow through it quite as efficiently. So part of the challenge of creating a solid state battery is getting that solid state stable and very tight. Mm-hmm. And also it still needs to be flexible so it doesn't crack. There's all kinds of things about it. So we have been moving towards solid state for a number of reasons. One is that because it is a solid, it's not quite as susceptible to some of the damage aspects in a crash, but also the damage that can occur due to heating and cooling and recharge cycles, DC fast charging, those sorts of things that are damaging to a liquid electrolyte battery are less so to a solid state battery. So what you can end up with is a smaller battery that has greater energy density, less weight of the battery, less weight of the structure around the battery because you don't have to worry about the crash potential. So you could theoretically end up with much greater EV range with smaller batteries and much, much faster recharge times than what you can get out of liquid. So it's sort of that next evolution in what we need to turn EVs into a really good replacement for any of the vehicles that are on the road today, including sports cars, which is what I get excited about when I think about a solid state battery. You don't want a heavy sports car, right? So that's one of the promising things is that you could theoretically, put it in, your typical supercar or whatever else, maybe get equivalent range to what you get on gasoline right now with roughly the same weight. That's within the realm of possibility when we start talking about solid state batteries.
It's because a solid state battery S2000, the Honda Roadster, that to me that seems a little bit like the Holy Grail. I'm not saying you're doing one because that's an old vehicle, but
it's certainly possible. Honda continues to want to build sporty cars. The fun aspect. We used to have a little saying, "Clean, safe, fun" is what we were all about. The fun is still there. We participate in all kinds of racing series around the world, F1, all the way down to go-karts. And that's all about fun. It's all about pushing yourself, pushing the boundaries of technology, but also pushing the boundaries of the human driver. And so, as we go towards 100% electrified by 2040 is what we've stated, we still want to have that fun stuff in there.
Now, a few years ago, I was in Japan, and I saw like a very early sort of test production line of Honda solid-state battery technology. Where's Honda right now with solid-state production?
So what you saw was a laboratory environment where we were sort of perfecting the processes of pressing and rolling these sheets of the solid electrolyte. So you may remember it was like a film that was being created in rolls. And the idea is that if you can perfect that pressing and rolling process, then you can layer these things on top of each other and you can stack them up to create, one bigger battery pack. In a lab environment, we've pretty much perfected that. We've gotten it to a point where we can make them reliably in a lab environment. The next step is mass production, and it's much, much harder. As I mentioned before, when you're making the solid electrolyte, you've got to press it just right. It has to be in a form that doesn't crack, that doesn't, react badly to heat and cold and all these other sorts of things. And so if you make it really fast, it's different from making it really slowly and carefully. Mm-hmm. So the next step is mass production testing. And we just opened up at the end of last year, we just opened up a mass production testing facility that is essentially a factory for making solid state batteries. It's a test factory, so we're not putting it in any products yet, but they are actually beginning to produce battery packs designed to go into our future EVs. And then we'll be using the output from that to test for future products. But we'll also be perfecting that mass production process. We get to see what goes wrong before we really need the batteries for a consumer car. And we look for efficiencies as well, because any new technology is more costly to apply than the old technology where the processes have all been refined over many years. So we're looking to get the cost down to where solid state batteries in the future could be at cost parity or even cheaper than liquid electrolyte batteries. That's not going to be the case immediately, as with any new tech. So that's part of the process too. So perfecting the quality, reducing the cost, and ensuring that we can do the volume that we need to actually achieve mass production, in the scale of millions of cars, which is what we produce every year.
Can you talk a little bit about the testing procedure? Is it a lot of in-lab testing, or do you have like a few mules that you kind of shove battery packs in and drive them around and then come back and look at the data, or is it all?
Yeah, I'm not as involved on the vehicle testing side. I just recently experienced this past fall. I went over to Japan, and we're introducing the new Zero Series EVs starting next year. And that's our all Honda developed proprietary system. The initial cars are going to use liquid lithium-ion batteries. We're waiting on the solid state more towards the end of this decade. But anyway, I test drove an Accord and a CR-V that had the Zero Series platform underneath it. And so if they were just driving down the road, you wouldn't know that, oh, wait, this is an Accord and CR-V with EV stuff underneath, right? So that's sort of what they're doing. Test mules, I guess you would call them. But we do have, EV platforms upon which you can test. And, it's similar to, I guess, any other electronic device. You could, take out a different battery and put it in another one, as long as we maintain certain spacing and things like that. I think that's probably how they'll end up doing it. Obviously, once we get the Zero Series EVs into production, then we'll have a much more active place where we could test different battery packs on development vehicles and things like that.
Let's talk a little bit about charging. I know that Honda is moving towards NACS with the Zero Series. What's going on with the Prologue? The Prologue's been a huge sales hit. I don't know if Honda was expecting it, but it seems like I'm seeing Prologues everywhere. And because of that, more EVs, more charging.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the success of Prologue, we were expecting it, and I'll tell you why. Because Honda brand has some incredibly loyal customers, and there was a gap in our electric vehicle offering. We didn't have an EV available to Honda customers for several years. The last EV that we had for lease was the Clarity Electric, which is a relatively low volume EV. It was only available in California. So we hadn't really had a mass production EV. But at that same time, other automakers were introducing pretty compelling products into the marketplace. Certainly Tesla and Hyundai, Kia, all of those had EVs in market. So we were seeing some Honda customers who wanted an EV who were going elsewhere. So we knew that there was some demand from Honda customers, people who really they trust our brand, they trust that we're not going to bring something to market and sort of leave them behind on quality or other things like that. So we knew that there was demand built in straight away from loyal Honda customers. It's not a surprise to us. We started building up the demand a little bit a couple of years ahead of time with the CR-V hybrid. I don't know if you remember at that introduction, we talked about how we were going to use that to build future demand for EVs, because our two-mode hybrid system, it basically operates as an electric vehicle with a gas generator. So you get sort of that experience of quiet operation at low speeds in EV mode and things like that, the regenerative braking and all those sorts of things. People get used to it and really appreciate it. And then that next step into an EV isn't quite as big of a jump. So we knew that would help us. And yeah, we're definitely happy to see the response. I'm happy to see random ones on the road. I was just walking in my neighborhood and I saw a brand new Prologue parallel parked, and I was like, yay, another Prologue. So it takes a little while for that to happen with any new car. The volumes are still relatively low, yeah, compared to like a Civic or a CR-V. But as we move towards 2040, we're going to convert everything to electric. And this new Zero Series that's coming is really sort of the start of that sort of snowball of EV volume going up and up and up. We showed a more refined version of the Saloon sedan at CES in January, and then we also showed off that small SUV, which is frankly the one that I'm really waiting on, because I like CR-V sized vehicles, and that just fits my lifestyle, my garage, and everything else really well.
I know you love biking, so you're just going to shove all the bike racks on it. That's what I'm assuming, at least.
Yeah. I'm probably like a hitch mount bike rack, actually, because I want to be able to pull in the garage.
Okay.
But as far as charging goes, I think you asked about NACS, and so the NACS charging standard, North American Charging Standard, which is what I think it stands for. Basically, I believe almost every automaker has now decided to go with that for the North American market. Currently, the Prologue, Honda Prologue, and the Acura ZDX are two volume EVs in the marketplace. They use the CCS, which is the prior standard for DC fast charging. And ultimately, they will eventually switch over to NACS. But the Honda Zero Series that's launching next year, that's going to start with NACS already on board. For the Prologue and ZDX to charge at an NACS charging location, such as like Tesla Supercharger, which our customers will have access to soon, hopefully this spring, you would use an approved charging adapter to be able to plug in there. I've actually done a little testing with that, and it works great. It's important to note for anybody out there who may have a Prologue or a ZDX, I know that there are some aftermarket charging adapters on the market. We do not recommend using those, simply because we haven't done any testing. There are some safety considerations in transmitting that much electricity through a device. So we're kind of doing a lot of effort to make sure that the adapter that we end up selling to our customers is safe and has been properly tested to not harm the vehicle and also importantly, not to harm the charging station.
Yeah, I think most automakers at this point are saying, please use our adapter, our approved adapters for these vehicles as they sort of transition over for those CCS vehicles. Right? Please use our adapter. Don't use something you found off Amazon or Temu or
Right.
whatever.
Well, and you know what? I got to admit that we're a little bit at fault because we've been a little slow to provide the approved adapters, and we're working on that. So we're getting very close to be able to provide the approved adapters. And I can understand why a customer might be impatient and want to go out and try something else. But I would just ask for them to be patient a little bit longer, and we'll have a good adapter that's been tested and approved by Honda.
Let's talk a little bit about Ionna. This is the sort of the Voltron of charging. It's like a bunch of automakers have gotten together and they're working on a charging network.
I like that. I like that idea of Voltron. Maybe they should go with that because they sort of have a retro vibe going with the branding anyway. So
Yeah.
I think they could probably pull together a deal with Voltron. Yes. So Ionna is essentially coming from the automaker side. We were getting a lot of comments from consumers when we did customer focus groups and things like that about EV adoption. What's it going to take to get you in an EV moving out of an ICE? We heard a lot of people who were very worried about public charging. Either they had friends who had an EV or they already had another EV in the family, and they were very worried about taking that road trip and reliably charging. They'd really like to replace what they've got now in a gas car, which is 5-minute refueling, splash and go, grab a snack in the convenience store and go. That's not quite there for almost anything yet, but it's getting closer with DC fast charging. So Tesla supercharger really, frankly, has been the gold standard in DC fast charging in the United States. They've done a great job at building out a network that's reliable. There's a really good chance if you show up at a supercharger that you're going to find working equipment. And in many cases with some of the other networks that were out there, that wasn't always the case. So the automakers saw a need. The expansion of charging points that we saw progressing at a slow speed didn't match up with all of our goals for introducing new EVs. So if we're going to go 100% EV by 2040, we saw projections where there were not going to be enough places for people to charge. And we could either wait for other companies to do something about it, or we could do something on our own to try to help the situation. So we're not looking to necessarily put anybody else out of business or anything else like that. We just see there's a huge gap in where we need to be and where it was going to go without us. So Ionna was formed to fill that gap on the volume side. You're getting a lot of chargers out there. The goal is 30,000 chargers by 2030 across the United States, and also then moving into Canada as well. And that's the volume side. But on the other side of it was quality. We want, good uptime, very fast charging, and reliable equipment, and nice locations. In a lot of cases, the existing DC fast chargers may be located sort of behind a building or in places without amenities like bathrooms, good lighting. Ionna also is setting a goal to have covered EV charging wherever possible. That it should be the majority of it would be covered by a canopy, so that if you're in inclement weather or direct sunlight, things like that, you don't have to get out in that. At most gas stations, you don't go out and fill in the rain. You have some sort of canopy over you. So the expectation from consumers is to have shelter and have a bathroom 24 hours whenever you want to charge. And in many cases, additional amenities. So Ionna is sort of upping the game, I guess I would say. Tesla is the current benchmark. But I think as Ionna starts rolling out, and they just opened up their first stations last week, to the general public, with the first ones in Apex, North Carolina, right near Ionna's headquarters, which is in Durham, North Carolina. And it has a little bakery area. It has like a lounge and 24-hour bathrooms, has meeting rooms that you can reserve if you needed to do an online meeting while you're waiting for your vehicle to charge. And then they envision an even higher level one that includes like restaurant and other things like that, fully owned by Ionna. So it's really up in that game and setting a new benchmark for DC fast charging. and ultimately, making a road trip pleasant and not stressful in an EV.
Yeah, the idea, because I when I do road trips in my EV, I will look for charging stations next to restaurants that I find that I like. If it's out in the middle of nowhere, I just don't bother. I have specific charging stations along my route, usually when I drive from LA to San Francisco and back, that has, oh, there's a restaurant next door that I like. I'm going to park here because I just enough time to go in, grab something. If it's something small, eat it really quick. If it's something a little larger, take it back to the car and maybe eat half of it and then get back on the road.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there will be a little bit of a learning curve, I think, for brand new EV drivers on, what they can do, how long it's really going to take for their particular car, to charge up to like 80%, which is really where you want to aim towards max when you're DC fast charging. Some customers think they need to get to 100% all the time, and that's just not the best way to handle an EV. So there's a bit of a learning curve that's going to occur as we get more and more volume of EVs out there. Just the courtesy side of things, not to leave your car parked on a charger when it's not charging, and all of those sorts of things need to come forward in order to keep everybody happy and everybody charged. But I agree. Right now, I do the exact same thing. And frankly, if you're going to pull off at a stop to get gas, often you're looking at the signs for what restaurants are around anyway.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing that already in a gas car. It's just you have a little bit more dwell time on the EV charging than you do for gas. So it does make sense to find somewhere that you want to spend some time doing something else for a few minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for chatting with us today. We're looking forward to the Zero Series and very much looking forward to solid state batteries.
Well, great. Yeah. Hopefully, maybe in a future podcast, we can talk about solid state battery production beginning and what models they'll be going into. And maybe if you make it over to Japan with us again, maybe we can tour the actual factory that's making them now.
That would be great. I am a big nerd for factories and batteries. For more information about the evolution of sustainability, head on over to sustainablecareers.sae.org. There you can check out our interview with the Mercedes-Benz CEO about the automaker's upcoming software-defined vehicles. Be sure to subscribe and listen every week on your favorite podcast platform.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.